Hi, this is Peter from Codemasters Academy. Today we'll cover JavaScript arrays. In a prior video, we went over variables and the different types of data a variable can hold. Arrays are one of those types. Let's get started. Arrays are essentially a collection of data. Imagine you had a list of 4 cities. We could create separate string variables like this. This might work for 4, 5, even 10 cities. But what will happen when we have 100? What about a few hundred? We simply don't want to manage this many variables. A better way is to store all the cities in a single array variable. Arrays can contain any type of data. These include string, numbers, booleans, objects, functions, and even other arrays. Other languages usually require us to specify the data type in the array, and this restricts the array to only those data types. In JavaScript, we're allowed to store different types of data in the same array. So the first item in the array can be a number, and the second can be a boolean. Depending on how you look at it, this can be a good or bad thing. The upside is that we're allowed the flexibility to store whatever we want. But that might come at a cost. If we're careless, we might lose track of the data type and introduce a bug in our code. Let's see how we can initialize an array. Here, I'm using jsfiddle.net to run my JavaScript. If you'd like to view the code, you can simply go to this URL. As in previous videos, I have the HTML and out function already set up to display the results in the bottom right panel. The first and recommended way is by defining an array literal. This is done with square brackets. We can initialize the array with nothing in the brackets. This will create an empty array. We can also define the values of the array by putting them within the brackets. To define multiple values, separate them with commas. The other way to initialize an array is with the new keyword. This is similar to the previous array we created in that we can define the values within the parentheses. This method also allows us to define the size of the array when we're initializing it. But this method of creating an array is not recommended because there can be confusion when initializing. Here's an example. Suppose we wanted to create an array with 2 values. The first value is the number 4, and the second value is the number 3. We do this by passing 4 and 3 into the new array constructor. When we output this, we can see the 2 values. Now suppose we wanted to create an array with a size of 4. We do this by passing it the number 4. As we can see, there's an array with 4 empty values. This is what we expected because we didn't define the values yet. But how do we create an array with 4 as the only value? If we initialize with the new keyword, well, we can't. In terms of readability, people looking at our code might not be sure if there are 4 items in the array or if there's a single item with a value of 4. So remember, you should create arrays with the square brackets. Once we've created our array, we're not tied to just those values we initialized with. Now let's go over how to add to an array. There are 2 ways to do this. The first is with the push function. The push function will take a value and add it to the end of the array. This is pretty straightforward. The second way is to add the item by index. An index refers to the position in the array. One thing to remember is that the first position is always index 0, not 1. Here's what I mean. Currently, our city array has 5 items. If we wanted to add a new value to the end, we'd add it to index 5. If we wanted to replace Los Angeles with another city, we'd use index 0. It's also possible to skip indexes and add our new value to an index further down. Be careful doing this because any indexes you skip will have empty values. Next, let's go over how we retrieve values from an array. Just as we use indexes to set values, we can also use it to get values. Accessing index 1 will return us New York. We can also use the arrays for each function to iterate through the values. The for each function requires us to pass a function that will handle the value and index of each array item. Here we simply output each index and value on its own line. Notice that the for each function skipped the empty item and jumped from index 5 to 10. Now that we know how to create an array, how to add to it, and how to read from it, let's go over some other commonly used functions of the array. We already know that the push function adds an item to the end of the array. The pop function will remove the last item in the array and return it. Here we pop the last item, Nashville, and assign it to variable y. Now when we output the city's array, we'll see that Nashville is no longer there. Something else that's commonly used is length. This is not a function, but a property of the array. We can tell because there's no parentheses needed. The length property will return the number of items in the array, including the empty ones. This comes in handy when we need the size of the array or we need to determine the last index. Finally, arrays have a sort function. This works well when your array has strings or numbers. As the name suggests, this function sorts an array of strings alphabetically or an array of numbers in order of smallest to largest. Okay, that does it for arrays. There are more functions, but what we covered are the most commonly used ones. Arrays are a powerful and very efficient way to store data. The more you use them, the more you learn to love them. Once again, if you'd like to view, edit, or run the code you saw here, you can always go to this URL. Until next time, keep coding.